Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Power Up Podcast, a podcast that was created to kind of tackle this idea that specifically in the entertainment industry, a lot of weeds I feel is cropping up, and the sake of being entertained is kind of dying, and that nostalgic feeling is dying. And what can we do to kind of rekindle that spirit, bring it back? But also the fact that I believe that there is definitely a spiritual warfare that's happening. And while this podcast is dedicated to specifically focusing on that sort of aspect, I'm always down to hear what else is out there. Some of you may have known that not too long ago, I had author Gary Wayne of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy on the show, and he has graciously allowed me to schedule him again to come on. So, welcome, Gary, again. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. So I'm thinking that maybe our conversation the last time might have stirred some interest. So we're going to see whether we can continue to do that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and right away, I said in the email that like so much positive feedback and what people just very receptive, just loved what you have to say. So I'm always down to always try to schedule something with you just to hear what you have to say. I know one specific thing people wanted to kind of comment on is in the last episode, you mentioned kind of the idea of two creations, because I have heard in Genesis, if you really look at the wording and whatnot, it can be hinting at there was two creations that took place. I've heard other people say, well, no, it's just a general version of the creation, and then Genesis 2 zooms in a little bit and whatnot. But that might be in a whole nother rabbit hole that we would have to schedule for like a whole nother video sort of thing.
It is a big subject because
Hmm.
there's a lot of detail. And so when you're going to get into that, you have to provide the minutia to show people what we're talking about. So, but I'll talk about the premise though. I mean, so we don't do a whole
Yeah, sure.
show on it, but yeah, I mean, we could do a whole show on both that and or a
Hmm.
whole show on is there a gap in
Oh,
let
yeah.
people and give people both
Hmm.
sort of sides to that equation and let them decide. So I'm one of those proponents where I measure everything against what's written in the Bible because I hold the Bible up as being the Word of God and
Hmm.
completely truthful and never contradicts itself. That's a high standard because you have a lot of critics out there who say well, the Bible contradicts itself all of the time. I always say that it's because it's adding more information in most of the cases. In some cases, that doesn't apply. And one of those cases is perhaps Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2, the day 6 creation of humankind and the creation of the Adamites. And the reason why it might not apply there is because the details are different. So for me, because I hold the Bible to a very high standard, only because my faith believes that it can't be in contradiction, that you can't get that many details different between one chapter to the immediate following chapter. And so the first thing I would say is that we don't have a day 8. So if there's two different creations, we have no idea how long it is after day 7, right? And but it's the details. And here's some of the details. First thing is that what's really interesting about day 6 is that it's created by God, Hebrew Elohim, not angels, because that can be a plural for angels. This is Ha Elohim. This is the Elohim plural of the word, which is that he who creates things and became Jesus, the Father and the Holy Spirit. They're there all together at God's command. So you see the word working just as we're told in the New Testament, and you also see the Holy Spirit there working for God because it's the Spirit of life, it's the Spirit of God, right? And that's hovering in Genesis 1-2. So in the Eden account, as you move into the Eden account, and in about verse 4 or 5, you get Lord God. But before that, even in the first 4 verses, it's just God. So now you've got Yahweh or Jehovah Elohim as opposed to just Elohim. Something is implying is different here. Yahweh is the Jehovah is there, and it's rooted in the same words for Yahweh and the great I am and the angel of the Lord that's in the fire in the book of Exodus, who is going to become the Word and the one who makes himself visible as the angel of the Lord and makes himself visible and present for Abraham. He is now inserted as, and you would understand that as Yahweh of the Elohim or Jehovah of the Elohim. So, and he's there to breathe life into Adam. And that detail isn't provided in day 6, but one can say, well, that's just more information. But he's there for a specific purpose. He's creating the Adamites for a special commission. And they're there to be the resolution to the angelic rebellion. And from Noah, from Adam down through Noah, through Abraham, through Judah, is the process as he allows things play out to bring in the Messiah that the angels don't anticipate in the book of Corinthians. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had him crucified, to end the angelic rebellion because they didn't anticipate the resurrection. And so that's what's still being played out until the end time. So that's why he's breathing a special life into him, just as he's blessing Abraham, who's going to be the one who brings about his lineage physically so that he can partake in the world and interact and sacrifice for the sin. So that's just the first signs of there might be something more going on there.
That's really
Go ahead.
interesting. Also, by the way, anybody who has been on the show before, we also have Eric Rolon. He was my co-host for another show that is currently still on hiatus. Hopefully one day it'll pop back up.
We'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back. So just wanted to get that there. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Gary, but just wanted to.
Yeah, it's just a couple more quick details, because
sure.
I was just sort of laying sort of a greater idea out there what's going on here, because it is adding more information, but I think it's after the fact. So the people of day 6 are created male and female in plural in Eden. And they're created all at the same time. And there's many of them. One presumes there's probably many races, at least 3 or 4 by that account. And so Adam is created in singular. And then you get a process, not anymore, just one. And they're looking for a partner for Adam. Well, who the heck is that partner? Because he has too much work to do. Are we actually going to bring in an animal? Is it going to be an angel? No, they decide that there is no suitable partner. So God is going to create Eve from the rib sometime later. And we don't know when. So that is completely sort of different than what's going on in day 6. The people in day 6 are told to multiply and spread out over the whole world. Adam's not told that. When Eve is born, she's not told that. They're not really told to do that until they're ostracized from Eden. You don't have the Eden account that's being talked about with this process before the multiply. It is completely different in terms of the details. It is just not talking about the same sort of process. There's an order of creation that is talked about in Genesis 2 that is different starting at about day 5 in Genesis 1. You have animals creating from the earth, some from the water or the heavens, as the different details in terms of how that's sort of created. And so it goes on and on and on. I have a great document for people if they want to get a hold of me. I'll give you a comparative on the 2 verses, and then I'll give you a document that sort of underlines some of the words. But it's all of those kinds of details that sort of roll forward that says, throughout that whole account. And one more, just so that people know what I'm talking about, is that the people on day 6 are told they can eat from any tree on the whole planet. Adam and Eve are told there's one tree you cannot. Again, it seems rather odd if it's the exact sort of same account. Then you roll forward after Eden. One last sort of example is that you have Cain, who is going to be ostracized, and he's going to move to Nod, and he's going to find a wife. Well, where does the wife come from? Well, everybody says, well, it's going to be sisters of Cain at some point in time. Well, that's rather interesting, except that after Cain is ostracized, Seth isn't even born, because the Bible lays out a linear sort of narrative. And Seth isn't born until Adam is 130 years old. And one presumes Cain was quite young, because they're doing their first offerings, their first fruit offerings, that Cain doesn't offer the first fruits, which is why his offering in part is not accepted. And so they would have been quite young, early in adulthood, in terms of how that process works. So sometime from early on till after 130 years, when Seth is born to replace Abel, then we're told more sons and daughters are born after that. We're just not told how many. And we know there's be quite a few, because in Deuteronomy 32, it actually says there's 70 sons of Adam that the nations were named after. Just as you have 70 after the flood. So you get all of these details that don't make any sense. The only thing that sort of makes sense is that there was people that were born before, whom he was able to choose a wife from. And he's given a mark to be protected. Protected from whom? We're told there's nobody else. He builds a city as soon as he gets to Nod. It's the first thing he does. A city for who? Protecting himself from who? I only need one detail to get my hackles up, in terms of I've missed something, I've misunderstood. But then there are more details than this. So for me, the only way to reconcile that is there's two creations. We know they're the same species, because man is the same word that Adam comes from in Genesis 1 to Genesis 2. So then we know they're the same species. They might be a different race in the species. This Adam may be a fourth race, or he could be the same stock of the four races that might have been created in the time of Genesis 6. And we know there's going to be four races, because that's what shows up after the flood. That's passed down through Noah and the wives. So somewhere along that happened. So it makes sense that in that great creation, but again, I'm making this up too long of a speech, but I was just trying to provide the premise for people that it just makes more sense that if we just don't get locked into this whole standard dogma, we get a better understanding of something greater at play. And then the seculars and the polytheists can't hammer us on the age of the earth, because we have the genealogy of Adam, fine, but we don't know exactly when he was created after Eden, if that's the case. And I think that's the case. It's one of the, where you have, like I call the renewal of the earth, or the gap theory, as some people call. I like the renewal of the earth, because that's what Psalms 104 calls it. I'm not dogmatic on that. I'm not saying that even though you can translate Genesis 1 of two ways, I lean towards an older earth because of the second translation. But to me, that's not details being incorrect, because when you read it from Hebrew, you could translate it either way. The Genesis 1 to Genesis 2 account, the Hebrew has no effect on that. It's just that it's different. It's different details.
Wow.
You brought up something really interesting there. And it's the creation of the Adamites potentially being in opposition to what would have been the fallen angels and their progeny. Now, I'm sure you've looked into this, as I know I have, and I've found next to nothing regarding it. But would that possibly be what is referred to in Numbers 21, where it describes the book of the wars of the Lord? Maybe those wars in the pre-Diluvian age that could have taken place between man and fallen angels and their offspring?
I mean, certainly you would have had, giants before the flood. They would be making war against humans. They would have been actually making war against perhaps God as well, if they had the capability of doing that. It's interesting if hopefully I've understood the question properly. There's a book called the Enoch Book of Giants.
Yes.
It's part of the series. And what's interesting in that accounting, and we don't get a lot of it because we only have fragments, but it's talking about an antediluvian Gilgamesh versus a post-diluvian Gilgamesh, which is another interesting thing that people need to be aware of, that you can have giants with the same names on both sides of the flood. So you have to understand when the flood happens and when and who the gods are, and the difference between the offspring gods and the parent gods. But Gilgamesh is part of the giants who is understanding and receiving that through these dreams, and they're trying to get it interpreted by Enoch as to what they can do to avoid the catastrophe that's coming. And he's told that you can't avoid it. So he makes war against the sons of God. He makes wars against the angels. And he loses the war, but he actually makes war against the loyal angels.
Well, that's another question there too, then, because you mentioned sons of God. Now, I know you followed Chuck Missler's studies, and he mentioned that the word sons of God was only ever used to describe a direct creation of God, be it Adam, a direct son of God, or the angels, those also who fell. They were originally sons of God. But I feel like that lends more credence to the idea that if the Adamites were also created on that same day 6th, if he decided, I'm going to create all these people all at once, those in effect also, I think, could be referred to as sons of gods, as a direct creation of God himself and not man. So I feel like that there's even more fuel for the fire there and more potentiality for validation.
Also, the late Michael Eisner too. He the book I'm reading, The Unseen Realm, he's talking about how, like, God actually, even though he created humans, he also created a divine council. He doesn't need to have a council, but he creates them, and they're also referred to as Elohim as well. I mean, for
and there's a rebellious assembly that's talked about in Psalms 82 that rules over the nations that I referenced to Deuteronomy 32, and those are sons of the Most High. And these are called gods, or El, and various Hebrew transliterations. And so the sons of God typically in the Old Testament, and I think Heiser, and I've not read any of his work, but I think Heiser was pretty much saying those were angels as well. We get sons of God that show up in Job 1:6 and 2:1, and they are reporting to this assembly in heaven. That's also recorded in Isaiah 14, that Satan wanted to raise his throne up, and Antichrist will try and do that again. And Daniel 8:8-10 actually brings down some of the starry host. So this is an ongoing, nothing new is under the sun sort of concept. And so this assembly is where the sons of God in Job 1 and Job 2 are reporting to, and Satan tags along, and he's one of the sons of God, now degraded at this point. And then what's really interesting is Job's 38:4-7, you have the morning stars, which is an order of angels, and the sons of God are celebrating at creation. So humans are not created before the heavens and the earth are, but Psalms 104 tells us the angels are. You have 4 different terms that are used interchangeably and together throughout the Old Testament. You have the sons of God as being angels, and you have them equated with stars in
the hosts
in Job 38, and the host of heaven, which is the Hebrew word Saba for an army, which rank in order of all these different orders of angels. And you also have angels that are called the host. You have them used interchangeably so that you know they are the same type of being. The Old Testament also calls Israel the son of God, or the children of God, and in Hosea you have that reference. Those are prophecies for the second Exodus, when they're going to be brought back into the covenant. So it's got nothing to do with the Old Testament. So yes, you could, I think you could make a good argument, and I liked your point there, that you could create Adam as a specific son of God, but different than the angels. Because he has immortality for a while, but only as long as he has access to the tree of life.
Well, he's still robed in light, him and Eve.
And he's born a physical creature. right? Angels are created a spirit being who can take a physical creature in the physical world. And we know that they can do that because we see angels like in the Sodom story and just before, when the angel of the Lord makes himself into a body and two angels are with them.
Yep.
So we know that they have the ability to do that. That's just one example, and there are others. So, but I think he's created as a son of God, but as a mortal one seeking immortality that is designed for the resolution of the angelic rebellion. So you have angels who were created immortal, intimate knowledge of God,
Mm-hmm.
and many rebelled. It's like, wow, how could that be, right? But it's true. So humans are created immortal, the ability to become mortal, but we have very little knowledge of God. And we have to choose God on faith to
Mm-hmm.
achieve the resurrection and to get our immortality to be created like angels. And because the fallen angels recognized the significance of the creation of Adam versus the ones in day 6, they immediately start to try and make sure that humankind from Adam is going to be destroyed from the face of the earth and into oblivion and never have a chance to be raised up to be like angels. Whereas the people in day 6, they just sort of led them astray, and they become worshipers of those fallen angelic realm. And the giants are created as part of the same story to lead them away from God, to ensure that they're not going to achieve immortality. And again, what none of them realized, none of the giants, none of their descendants, none of the angels, was the resurrection. And if that was the case, they would have ensured Christ wasn't crucified.
Mm. Oh boy. My goodness.
Like, so entertainment.
Yeah, so entertainment. But also you mentioned real quick the Book of Giants. Wasn't that actually didn't they, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, wasn't that part
Yes.
of like what was included in there?
Yes, it's part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's part of a series of books as
Mhm.
well. And it seems to be a piece, or there's books that are based on the original Book of Giants. It's hard to know. So there's a Manichaean Book of Giants, which is taking the old information from that they would have had a bigger manuscript of than what we get out of the Dead Seas, that they overlaid the Persian story, which is the same story, has different names of the characters, but it's telling the same story. And they call that the Manichaean Book of Giants. And
How do you
that
spell that?
Manichaean,
Yeah.
Manechean. That'll get you to it.
Cool.
It's
Thank you.
from Mani. Mani was a Gnostic in the time, just before Christ, and creating of Manichaeism, a Gnostic religion.
Okay.
And so, and he was a collector of these books and things. And so he's the one who is thought to have put that together. And the Vatican apparently has these books, and we think they've released part of that, whether or not the translation is accurate or not. But part of that series of books is the Lost Book of King Og, that an author named Demon translated, which is part of the Manichaean Book of Giants, according to what the priest and Demon say in the introduction, and it's part of a larger book that they have at the Vatican.
Wow.
Out. I've got more
Amazing.
research to do now, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. It never ends. There's just so much
It doesn't. It
information out
doesn't.
there. So
Well, thank you for kind of answering the foundations of the two creations, or two sort of creations happening at once. That's very insightful and insane, just crazy for sure. But yeah, for the people who are joining or who have been here for a while and may see what the title is, I'm kind of thinking this time around to kind of maybe narrow in on something a little bit more specific, and that's something that I've kind of been noticing and kind of what this podcast was about as well. And that is pretty much the insanity that's happening in I say entertainment industry, but really in entertainment in general. I mean, it can stem from music, videos, video games, what have you, sort of thing. And funny enough, Gary, since having you on the first time, it's like all the spiritual stuff is like I'm more like super in tune into it more often than not. But this is something that I feel is kind of unfortunate, is that we're at a point where we have these two extremes. You have one side where they're just like, we don't care, we'll go into the debauchery and all that sort of stuff, and for all intents and purposes it's like Hollywood, the casting couch, what you hear behind the scenes, all the disgusting stuff that they do behind the scenes. But then you also have the extreme on the other side, where we could take, for example, the Satanic Panic back in the 90s, where everything possible is demonic and you're not supposed to enjoy it, you're not supposed to do it or whatnot. And I and we were kind of talking about it behind the scenes, but obviously there has to be a middle. There's a middle ground, and I think as believers we're kind of more open to the idea of knowing of like something that's like, ooh, okay, yeah, maybe we should stay away, as opposed to
well-rounded believers is probably a better point to put on there, because it was
true.
the believers that got all up in arms about the Satanic Panic. My mom used to walk through my room and go pick up a Spider-Man action figure and go, "What is this? That looks demonic." I'm going, "All right, mother, have you seen a demon in person? Have you actually seen a demon with 6 arms slinging web? Is that what a demon looks like to me or to you? Because I'd love to know exactly what it looks like for you to call this demonic or any one of my GI Joes." So like, I think a finer point is well-rounded believers, what we've come to understand.
Yeah, very good, very good, well-rounded. And I guess just kind of, and obviously it's a huge umbrella term, but it just leaves open to whatever you would like to talk about, Gary, is just this: what is your research found throughout the different cultures and even Western culture and all that stuff? Because we really think about, like, when we were talking about with, you know, the morning stars and supposedly Lucifer possibly being the person that was seeing and all that stuff. It's not like it was inherently bad, but then once the fall came and once corruption entered into the world, obviously, like what you talked about with Enoch the Evil, people can twist everything up and make a fake version sort of thing. So I'm just curious of what kind of what your research has found out, and obviously what the scripture says as well, because it still bothers me to this day. Some people are like, you know, the Bible says you're not supposed to glorify bloodshed and stuff like that. And it's like, well, yes, but remember Abram, when he found out that his kinsmen were taken and Lot was with them, he's like, all right, 310 of my trained people were going, and they just slaughtered everybody, sort of thing. And God wasn't opposed to it, sort of thing. So I guess just kind of what have you found, Gary, throughout your multitude of notes, sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I would start just on a sort of basic premise, though, that not all knowledge is good or evil. It's how it's used. Just as you have the knowledge of good and evil, and you have to be wise enough to be able to handle that knowledge. And as humans, we're not always equipped well enough to do that, and that's part of our process that's going on with us until we're resurrected. So we need to keep that in mind. We need to keep in mind that entertainment has a long history, and it goes back into prehistory, just as our history does. And that entertainment, for the most part, in terms of the stuff that has survived, there's probably always two different levels. There's the one that's written by those in power, which I would say would be mostly the royals and the nobility class, the elite class, that come from the giants. So people may want to go back to the last show and look a little bit more what I was talking about on that. And so they're the ones who educated only the elite. And so entertainment, as it comes down through history, is the history as they see it, and it's told through a polytheist lens. They have gods in all of the cultures, right? So it's not a monotheist history. It's not that it's all wrong. It just has a slant to it. But it's that entertainment aspect, as it connects into what we see today, is we should not look at all entertainment as being evil. We shouldn't look at concerts as being just evil. I would say there's a couple things that we need to understand is that if there is a idol on the stage of a god or representing a
Baphomet.
god, yeah, that might be a clue that you ought not to be participating because it might be a ritual and all the songs and everything that goes along. So we don't want to be participating in rituals. It's like yoga. It's a stretching exercise, but in terms of the music, in terms of the setting, in terms of what's being discussed, that is part of polytheism to become in touch with the divine essence. Don't get involved in that. Just make sure that you're separating. I mean, stretching is not a bad thing. Meditating is not a bad thing. It's just what you're doing with that makes sense. So we have a long history of entertainment being told by polytheists. So we have to understand that the things that they talk about is their history, their genealogies, their belief system. So we have to understand the language that they talk in. And one of the things that you learn by reading my book is a lot of that language, so that you can pick up, hey, that's telling me something so that I need to be aware of. So when I watch, and I love science fiction, I love entertainment, but I'm not just turning it off because there's an all-seeing eye or something. I'm recognizing the symbol for what it is and saying, okay, what's the message they're trying to communicate? So I have a better understanding what they're really trying to say. And that I also understand it can be used as preparation for people for down the road to accept things because it's a little bit more normal. So I understand that that's going on, but what we have to do is understand what's going on and be very good with critical analysis and objective while we're looking at that. And if you're watching fairy tales, you ought to be telling, and you're watching it with your children, you ought to be telling them that these might be a memory of creatures that were created by fallen angels that weren't permitted by God, right? And it just might be something that you want to be aware of. And I don't want people to stop watching some really good entertainment. So they write really good stories. They're called fairy tales. All of their literature that we understand is a fairy tale, just as they call the Bible a fairy tale. And in that, it has a happy ever, what is it called? Happy ever ending. Happy ever after ending. And so they look at the Bible as being the same sort of thing. And Tolkien and Lewis called that eucatastrophe, so that it's not the real end. It's just so that the reader won't be too upset about the hero. He actually dies as opposed to he doesn't have a happy ever after ending. And they look at the crucifixion as polytheists as that story, because they look at Jesus as a mortal prophet, but he survived the cross and he wasn't resurrected. So they say that's the fairy tale. And to understand that, you have to be an adept from an interpretive perspective to understand the allegories, understand the true meaning of the story. That's how they write their literature. So it has that interesting, compelling narrative. Like Tolkien and Lewis were terrific writers, right? But they're not talking about Christian history. It's anything but. So we have to be aware of that. So if you look at what happens down through history, you have like all of the Greek mythology that's written in a literature form. It's about the gods, it's about the giants, it's about the bloodlines. Ovides in Rome, same thing. Roll that down, because I won't go through the whole history of literature. You have very famous writers that are propped up, like Shakespeare, who is associated with Bacon, who has his own separate sort of mythos as well. And he is creating a series of plays that is all documenting their bloodline history, documenting their belief system. Characters of that will be very much representative. And they even have things like in Midsummer's Night Dream, the fairies and the King of the Fairies and Oberon, and
the whole fae aspect.
They embed that history in, and it's a great story. But unless you are a polytheist adept, you don't get the full sort of meanings in there. And so Bacon created two literary societies, the Knights of the Helmet and the Spear Shaker Society. The Spear Shaker was Apollo and Athena, who had the spear that they shook. And I won't go into the whole metaphor of, but they're two Greek gods who sponsored the arts. And he names this society the Spear Shaker Society, who William Shakespeare is part of. But the bigger part of the story is that he's bringing in writers to create the new English language for their New World Order, this Babel language that he imagines that through England, they're going to start this march towards the end time, and then they need this new universal language. And so he creates this new language that then becomes the language that's used in the King James Version Bible, and starts to go around the world through the English Commonwealth. And so that's one of those literary societies where there's a whole bunch of knowledge being imparted that people like William Shakespeare, who never went to Oxford, would know nothing about. But he's writing about information on things he should know nothing about.
That's the same thing could be said of the writer of Gulliver's Travels, where inside the story where he gets, I think, to the third location that Gulliver ends up in, they brag about knowing about the two moons of Jupiter. One of them that has such a low light absorbing density that it can't hardly be seen, but on like a certain number of 100 years that go by where it passes just close enough to actually be able to be seen, it's almost completely opaque and black. But that's sort of the same idea there. And what just touching on Shakespeare real briefly, Richard Dawkins, in his book The God Delusion, he writes specifically inside there, he asks a question sort of just rhetorically, so in the wake of my standing staunchly against God and his book and his society and the Christians, do I say we do away with literature? No, by all means, we have to keep the Bible around, because we have people like, and he specifically says, Shakespeare, who wrote so prolifically and so well known throughout the ages, and he pulled these verses and idioms directly from the Bible. And that makes me wonder now, what, like you said, was Shakespeare playing at something else that he had no real firm grasp of, but to him maybe it sounded poetic? Or was he being fed this by somebody else and
Bacon
knew exactly what he was doing?
Bacon would have been providing the information. He was a Rosicrucian, and at that time, a higher level than what we have today, right? He wrote a book called The New Atlantis, right? Which is the end time world where you have 6 days of Solomon, again, drawing off the Bible on some terms, where you have a harmony of science and religion, that they work together, and that's their religion. And they created theosophy to be part of that bridge to that language which New Age comes from. So they see it coming back to its original home as being a partner, because Enochian mysticism before the flood, Enoch, son of Cain, not son of Jared from the Sethian line, creates the 7 sacred sciences that creates the mystical religion, because they want to keep it from the mundane, and that's going to create the secret societies through the mystery schools thereafter, right? So it's that harmony that's going to come back. So again, we're talking about their history, and that Bacon is, as I say, he is a very high level Rosicrucian too, and he's going to be the second most powerful person in the time of Queen Elizabeth, as well as in the time of King James, and is a significant force for the exploration of the New World. And so he plays a very, very large part in shaping the world that most people don't give them a lot of credit for. And of course, Atlantis will have 10 kings, just as it did in Plato's Critias and Timaeus. And of course, we have those 10 kings in the end time, Daniel 2, 7, Revelation 12, 13, and 17. So they draw on the Bible because they have something called a polychronicon. And that was their oral history that they eventually put into writing to make sure it didn't get lost, even though they had sort of ways of trying not to lose it through the oral history, but it was so hard to not lose it. They believe, this is their belief, that they needed the Bible to be written in this new language. And that they needed that, and it would be like an island as part of the larger polychronicon of their history. And that they needed this Bible for their oath-based system, that they needed to be able to use something in the world and not be sort of not be recognized for what they're doing. So they create this oath-based society. Like, you go to a courtroom, you have to swear on a Bible. You have all of these oaths. That goes right back to Mount Hermon and the angelic harem anathema to create the giants.
It's
And
got Freemasonry written all over it.
it is, because the Freemasons are a lower order than the Rosicrucians, right? As you understand the thelemic tree of the hierarchy. So understand that this knowledge that Bacon had, there was people who would have had knowledge more than him, because even though he's elite, he's not a direct sort of royal bloodline, right? He's not a royale, but he's part of the larger nobility. And so he had a lot of knowledge and the learning that he would have received throughout his years. So that was all put into their writings, so to keep their history alive and to keep that ever-present sort of knowledge. And so you roll that forward to Tolkien and Lewis. They, as young people in university, are going to join the Inkling Society at Oxford College. Well, the Inkling Society is a Rosicrucian society of the Golden Dawn, to be specific, that interesting creature named Aleister Crowley was part of. But there's no record of them being Freemasons, right? So there's no way somebody could be part of that, because you'd have to be an adept to be going into that. So, but the thing is that, and I have a series on Tolkien and Lewis, including their bloodlines in part 5 and part 6, is they were part of royal bloodlines. They were initiated from childhood. They were what you call an adept before you're allowed to become an adept. You have to be 25 to 30 in that range to become an adept. So you might hear a really odd term called a 32nd degree adept. Well, that's not an adept, because in the Scottish Rite, which is the York Rite split 11 times, 11 times 3 is 33, you have to be a 33rd degree Scottish Rite to be an adept.
My grandfather was a 32nd degree, actually. I don't think he was. I doubt he was adept, but he was. He could
have been 32nd degree, but he wouldn't have called himself an adept. I actually did a show with a Mason who was 32nd degree adept, as he called him, and he was under 25. And he said, "What do you think of that?" I said, "Well, you're not an adept unless you're a royal." And he confirmed he was pure bloodline, and he couldn't accept his adepthood yet. So if you understand that both Tolkien and Lewis were royals, they could be part of a Rosicrucian society, because they're higher than first level adept at Freemasonry. They're higher than Illuminati. They're probably even higher than Rosicrucian.
Wow.
At that age. And so they weren't there to be fed the information. They were there to learn their craft as part of that society. And so their writings reflect their history, their religion, their characters that come out of prehistory. And they never renounced their writings. They said they were Christians. They probably weren't even lying in terms of how they understand it, because they believe that there is a Gnostic Christianity sect in their greater global Gnosticism. They just don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. They just believe he's a prophet. So they call themselves Gnostic Christians, except Jesus thinks he's a great teacher. And so they never renounced their statements about the Bible as being a fairy tale, or as that it's written with a eucatastrophe. They never took that down, but they certainly wrote about their history and their belief system. And they're fabulous writers. But if you're reading it, you can enjoy the story. You can understand what their world may have been like once you understand the allegories, but understand it's not Christian literature. And you can't have things like satyrs in there. satyrs do show up in the Bible that are these good sort of beings. I mean, they have a portal involved. They go from a closet into this different dimension, this different world. Aslan is created as Christ would be if he incarnated, which is a word we ought to be very, very careful of, on another world or another planet. Incarnation is a polytheist term, like Buddha was an avatara of the avatar Vishnu to give him more wisdom, right? And that Shiva incarnated into an individual named Narasimha. And Narasimha is quite famous in the Hindu religions as well. And Narasimha is, you just got to know it's going to be a lion. And Aslan is an incarnation, as Shiva was incarnated into Narasimha as a lion. And they're pulling this out of Hindu religion and history. And this is how Christ would be on another planet. He's just another incarnation of one of the fallen angels. And Aslan is that lion. And in Gnosticism, they believe that the coming Messiah will be an incarnation, and that Jesus was an incarnation. And that's where he received his knowledge from as a great teacher. And he's one of many who come along in that line. You've got so many characters in there. I mean, just look at Lucy, for example. That's a female character for Lucifer, right?
The whole fire element and all that.
Yeah, and in the dualistic polytheist religion, Lucifer would have a female goddess, because it's a dual god-goddess religion, right? And that's what's being allegorized here. And Lucy is like a fairy queen. She's a Gibberah, or like Gibberim is male, Gibberah is the female aspect of it. And Lucy, I mean, her bloodline is talked about. That goes right back into prehistory, to the Nephilim, and to the to the gods. And so this is a very common understanding of what would be encoded as allegories for the adepts and their children that they're teaching, to understand what's really written in there. And so those are just a few quick things that are in there. You could do a whole show on all of the things that are in there. It's based on the 7 wandering stars in terms of how they lay out the different stories. One's dedicated to each one of the wandering stars. It's all polytheist, but it's wonderful writing. I mean, Lord of the Rings is an antediluvian story about the different types of peoples that they had created. And at the end of it, you see all these creatures other than humans sailing off on a boat onto an ocean. That's representing the time of the flood, because now is the time for humans, and they had to leave for a while. And like the white elves that are in there, these are actually, if you look at what the Tuatha De Danann are described as, which are giants both before and after the flood, and the Shea people, spelled Sidhe, and Google writers of the Shea, you're going to see individuals that look like these white elves. And white elves aren't the little elementals. They are a larger version. They're a different one than the dark elves that are part of the ugly ones. There's 4 groups of elementals, but these are an allegory for the blonde hair, blue-eyed Tuatha De Danann, or Aryan, or giants, or you could just as easily have red-haired, hazel-eyed, pale-skinned ones as well. And you've got all these different kinds of little beings in Lord of the Rings, right? You've got the hobbits, and you've got the dwarves, and the dwarves are really important. Again, part of the ugly. I should explain. There's ugly fairies like the dwarves, like the trolls, like the gnomes, and there's a whole list of them. You've got mischievous ones like the leprechauns, and a whole list of them. You've got good-looking ones like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan, named after a pan god and a nature god, and a whole bunch.
He even plays a flute too.
Yeah, a whole bunch of things going on there that I don't have time to go in. I'm on the elementals, but he's part of, the whole fairy culture as well. And then you have a fourth one, which is, I didn't write about in the book, but I do in the second book. That'll be out soon. They're called the salamanders, and they're like a taller reptilian being. So they're not as tall as the Nephilim, but they're way larger than the smaller fairy ones. The dwarves, getting back to the story, are depicted as working in the mountains, in the earth, to manufacture weapons and stuff. In their belief system, they manufactured the weapons for the demigod giants, and in some versions, even for the gods. But gods would be able to manufacture their own weapons at will. So demigods are often conflated with gods. He's just telling the antediluvian history in the Lord of the Rings.
Ah, my goodness. That's a lot to take in.
That is a lot.
Yeah. Or you get into science fiction like Star Wars. I mean, you got Anakin. Anakin. And some versions on the Anakim for the giants in the Bible is spelled with an N, not an M. And you've got, who you like Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, he's an interesting thing. And he's the son of a high priest. And Obi in Hebrew is a mumbler or a necromancer.
So
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a question for you. Looking at a film like Eyes Wide Shut by Stanley Kubrick, shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
he ends up dead.
Yeah.
A lot of mystery surrounding his death.
Yep.
Also, it seemed like he was really trying to strike at the heart of these ancient and secret societies with this film that he produced. So like bearing that in mind, you mentioned how you have people like Shakespeare, you have people like Lewis, like Tolkien, who they've essentially been fed exactly what they need. They've learned their craft and learned how to
Yep.
now present it to the masses in such a flowery way that's so alluring and easy to be enraptured by. Excuse me. So I'm totally with you on the premise that through the years and through the films and the stories and the books, this slow inculcating takes place of sort of softening people's resolve against a certain thing, against a certain practice or a certain understanding. And it's like, oh no, this is just colorful storytelling here. We're just telling a great story. We're just entertaining you. But little by little taking it the next step further and the next step further and the next step further till you have what in Eyes Wide Shut is meant to be this entire ripping away of a veil and saying, no, all this time, this has been exactly what's been at play here, especially within our entertainment worlds, because let's face it, some of the biggest players that have ever been able to woo a crowd or whip somebody up into a frenzy have been those who have a theatrical background. Like you mentioned Shakespeare, like who better to be able to move people to wince, laugh, smile, cry, vomit even, with such intense emotion than a playwright, somebody who's built to tell a story. So bearing all of that in mind, and just sorry, taking your book into account as well, where you mention the two pillars upon which the seven sacred sciences were written. One pillar that was made to withstand fire, one made to withstand a flood. What do you suppose then is Hollywood's seeming, not just Hollywood's, but also our nation's government and our Federal Reserve, what do you suppose their infatuation is then with Egyptology and Egyptian lore, not just in the storytelling, but right on down to our currency?
Well, it's keeping the old culture alive. It's keeping that thing sort of, we swim in a world of polytheism. Like it's everywhere. All the representations are everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's in the courts. It doesn't matter whether or not it's in the entertainment. It's everywhere. So it should be in the money of this world as well. That it's representing that there are the invisible ones and the visible ones that we're told about in the Bible. And the invisible ones are the fallen angels, and You could include the disembodied spirits of the giants as well, and that are influencing and governing this world, just as Satan is the prince of this world. And that just as there's a God, council of gods for a time that is counterfeiting the council in heaven, and that Satan sits above that council, and that this world is controlled by them. So everything that they're in control of is going to reflect that um, principle. So if you look at what the seven sacred sciences and mysticism was created to do, and you see that today as the seven liberal arts do today, which includes the literary craft, it is designed to do four things. One is to lead, and the main one, lead people away from God, right? Put in wedges, doubt, seduce them into some other idea. The second thing is to degrade God,
Mhm.
right? And the
Mhm.
third thing is not to give him credit for anything. Say that he doesn't exist. Say that he didn't make everything, right? And then the fourth thing is to honor their pantheon of gods in everything that they do, whether it's in the buildings, whether it's in the statues, whether it's in the entertain. Everything is designed to honor the pantheon of the gods that they worship, so that when you go to university today that has the modern seven sacred sciences known as the seven liberal arts, which form the mystical religions around the world, why you if you see Greek architecture or Egyptian architecture or Babylonian architecture that basically makes up most of the architecture of the universities, although I see them starting to replace that with something a little bit, let's say more modern. We just, I think, have to be a little bit more savvy as to what's being built in there. That it's
Mhm.
built with sacred geometry and, probably astrological alignments to honor their gods, and that you're going to be educated into degrees, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and the names of some of those degrees become rather secret society as well, and you get this sort of scroll diploma, and
It
you have
sounds
this
too
ritual for
coincidental to be coincidental. It's like it's so on purpose, even.
yeah, everything in science is named after the gods. Doesn't matter. Whatever they name is going to be, it's all there to honor their religion because they control the education.
Even though the Bible doesn't really, I mean, you can get kind of hints of it and stuff. Is this kind of ultimately like Satan's way of getting what he really wanted in the end? Because he got filled with pride in the end, and even though the Bible doesn't necessarily state it, he wanted to be on the same shelving like top as God. So I would assume he would wanted to be worshipped like
Yeah.
God would be worshipped. Is that kind of
Yeah.
why he
So, yeah.
ultimately
So,
in the end he's kind of
yeah.
wanting
So,
all that to lead?
yeah. So, Hail El Ben Shakar, Isaiah 14:12, that we would know Lucifer, son of the morning, that should be Hail El, son of the morning. That's
Mhm.
probably one of his names, like Michael, ending in EL, like
Mm.
Gabriel, like all angels have an EL. That's Lucifer's the name of the god of the Gnostics, just as the great architect of the universe is that name. In that verse, he tried to raise his own throne up to heaven, to be like God, to overthrow God, but he knew that he couldn't win. He knew how powerful God was, but he wanted to be like God. He wanted to have his own realm away from God, and that's what he was really looking
Mm.
to gain. And up till the time of the resurrection and up till the time that Jesus, while still in the grave in First Peter, went to talk to these spirits that are in the bottomless pit prison and was telling them that your rebellion is over. There's more things to be played out. So all the names of the book of life will be fulfilled and people have the opportunity to blot their names out or not. All of that is permitted to happen. You're going to the lake of fire at the end of that, and Satan will end up there as well. So he never thought he could win. He just wants to have his own realm. and they would love to have their own realm even today, but they know that that's not going to happen. But they deceive the people to follow them. They deceive their followers that they can win, and that's why you'll see Antichrist try and storm heaven in Daniel 8 to 10, and Revelation 12. It's the same timing to try and do the same thing Satan tried to do. So yeah, he tried to create something away from God. That was the end goal. And you see that in some of the entertainment, like that was a movie Doctor Strange.
Yes, with
yeah.
Dormammu.
Enter the
Yeah.
multiverse.
Yeah, you have this evil dark lord of the whole universe, and they're trying to negotiate and rebel to have Earth as the only single place not ruled by the dark lord of the universe. That's the allegory they're talking about. It's their belief system. And the dark lord, of course, is the evil god of the Bible, and how they would view the God of the Bible. So if you understand their belief system, they'll reflect that.
Wow. That's so on the nose. That's so on the
interesting
nose
too,
for well, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, I'm just saying that's interesting, because if Lucifer would have wanted a realm of its own sort of thing, but yet it says God holds everything together. I mean, the realm that he wanted is literally Gehenna. In a like it seems
Yeah.
like it's so
Well, that's accurate too. So in the occult
crazy.
belief
So
system, heaven is located in Sheol, Hades, the other world, whatever you want to call it.
mhm.
So everything flows out of that. It's not above in terms of the firmament heaven or wherever the dimensional heaven that God lives and the angels dwell. It's not that heaven. It's actually below the earth. That's why all of their models in occultism has it sort of below the earth, but it's in another dimension, and you have to have access that through portals. So if you look at their thelemic tree in terms of that secret society hierarchy that I was talking about, where the Rosicrucians were higher than the Illuminati, imagine that as a tree trunk. Imagine it as an evergreen. Imagine it, which is representative of immortality. Imagine it as a cedar of Lebanon, a giant tree. And that you have these tree trunk organizations that go up the top. You have Freemasonry at the bottom, first level of depthhood. You have Illuminati, that's just above that. You have the Rosicrucian just above that. You have the Committee of 300 right above the Rosicrucians. Then you have the Council of 33, and then the 13 families. That's the Western thelemic tree. The roots that go down into the earth go down into Hades, and that's the source of their power from their heaven. And so the branches that now intersect into that trunk organization would be answerable to those trunk organizations. And it's just a matter of fitting in, where do the Bilderbergers fit in? Who do they answer to in that trunk? Who do the Jesuits report to? Who do, even on the lower level, like the Lions Club or the Elks Club, those low level ones, they would go into Freemasonry. Each of those trunk organizations have a specific agenda and a role. So if you start to understand that now, and that's also known as the world tree, but the world tree is known by that evergreen tree and or a great elm tree, which is orme in French, which is we would understand they're kind of interchangeable in the older world as also oak and also ash. But elm is the preferred version of the occult. And so these two trees grow on Mount Hermon as and understood as oak in this application in Amos, where it's talking about the Amorites that were like the cedars and the oaks of Bashan, of Mount Hermon. The genealogical tree that everybody is familiar with, it's this great wide trunk tree, and it's got all of these umbrella branches going out. It's an umbrella tree. It's an elm tree. And those genealogies that they put on it are the genealogies that they created for themselves with their own imagery for their bloodlines from the original patriarchal Rephaim or Nephilim and Godfather. And again, those roots go down to Hades, where that whole source and power come from. So they are the visible ones that they're showing you in terms of their organizational structure and their genealogies that rule the earth for the invisible ones. And as the divine, as given the authority with the divine right to rule as the royals that come from Mount Hermon, which where the assembly of the gods are located, everything starts to make sense.
Hmm.
I have a question. So, given what you described before about humans being physical, who can attain to immortality, and angels being the immortal spiritual that can also, through shedding of their Orchiterion, take on a physical form. Um, do you think that at the heads of of these societies, like the Masons, Illuminati, Rosicrucians, the Order of the 300, even going as far as to those who engage in whatever manner of depravity at places like Bohemian Grove, or those various secret society collectives, leading right down to our boardrooms with our CEOs and CFOs of these major corporations throughout our nation, not just our nation, but the world over, and then into entertainment. Um, do you think a number of the people who are heading up those particular either organizations or societies are either one, fallen angels, or two, demon possessed individuals?
Yeah, probably the latter.
Okay.
There could be an avatar effect going on as well, but that seems to be more rare. And if people are, and I talked about it earlier, and I didn't give a biblical example of how we know that might be true. The biblical example for an angel with a symbiotic relationship providing knowledge and power, as with Buddha, as what they'll say the Antichrist or Jesus had as that incarnation. Um, we get that example in the time of the New Testament, in the time of Jesus, with Judas in particular, where he is struggling to
Yes,
go
yes, yes,
through with the
yes.
betrayal of Jesus, and Satan enters into him so that he has the strength to do that. That's that avatar. It's a more symbiotic relationship.
Hmm.
Demonic relationship tends to be quite vicious, right?
Mhm.
Demonic relationship is because, and let me now back up a step just because you mentioned oiketerian, and I just want to make sure people sort of understand that term. You're
Sure.
referring to Jude 1:6 and 2 Corinthians 5:2. 2 Corinthians 5:2, it's house in heaven. Jude 1:6, it's habitation where the angels came from in Jude 1:6. Oiketerian means a dwelling place for the spirit. So you need a dwelling place for the spirit in heaven, whatever that means. You have this oiketerion where that spirit dwells within this presence. And we see that spiritual presence as it comes to the earth, but it's not physical. But they need a physical oiketerion, a house, a dwelling place for their spirit on earth. So they leave that into another dwelling place, which becomes the physical body that we talked about, like with the angels in Sodom, so that they can physically interact and they can pass on that DNA when they reproduce. And so we're told in the New Testament that you have a soul, a body, and a spirit. And the
Mhm.
soul and the body is of this world. The spirit comes from heaven. And as the book of Ecclesiastic talks about, when you die, the soul and the body goes to dust and it sleeps, and your spirit goes back to heaven from where it came. So in the physical world, they need to create an oiketerion, a soul and a body, for a dwelling place for the spirit. Well, a disembodied spirit of a slain giant, that spirit's going to either go to a few locations as we understand it. One is roaming
Hmm.
the earth. They can also be in the abyss if they were part of the terrible ones,
Mhm.
as Ezekiel 32 talks about. They're in the sides of the abyss, as it's talked about. And so they could also be in what the cult belief is that they had enough knowledge through the rituals to find their way to Hades, their heaven, where their gods are, right? The one's not in the abyss, although the abyss is in Hades, just it's part of Hades. Is two different.
Mhm.
Okay. terms that are being talked about there. The ones that wander the earth are the ones that Jesus was dealing with, including Legion, that they thirst, and they're like in dry places, and they need a body to rest and to physically interact. So that's typically a takeover. You let them in because you have to let them in to do that, but that's not symbiotic. There's a suppression of the host and there's a war going on.
Yeah.
You see that manifesting in its behavior and how it looks. In the occult beliefs in the higher adept level, and shamans and cultures all around the world, once they achieve that level, as well as in the secret societies, they believe in something called like the crazy clown trickster spirit. It's kind of the same ideology, a whole different rabbit hole, but it's about the spirit that you invite in because you have the knowledge to control it or be an equal with it, that they teach in secret societies, and it can add additional knowledge to you. So I don't think it actually works that way. I think you let a demon in.
No.
I don't care what worldly knowledge you think you have. They're going to be the ones that are controlling you. So I think that's probably what happens, but or they are just they acquiesce to it because it's their belief system, right? They don't want to not be able to, when they die, go to their heaven, right? To Hades or to Valhalla, wherever you want to call it. That's all the same place in polytheism, different than the heaven where God is. So yeah, they actually would be not only in a lot of cases being possessed by them, but they're also communicating with them. And they call them the Great White Masters, the Celestial Great White Brotherhood. Some of them called aliens, spirit guides. They're known by a plethora of different names. So there's a communication that they have when you're at an adept level, a high level adept level, and there's also ones that they bring on their people. And so you can start to see that sort of imagery. It's almost like the theater mask, right? It's hiding who's really inside of who you're portraying. It's an allegory of that, just as you get it more visible in the theater masks in China, where it actually looks like a demon spirit, right? It's and so we need to sort of understand what their belief system is, and we would see that sort of with the clown look. That's like the Chinese theater mask, or the court jester, the Joker, right? And the Joker was a way of that they created to put a magi in the royal court that wouldn't be recognized as a priest because he's a fool, right? As he's portrayed, that's his image, but he's providing knowledge and advice to the royale all the time. But if the royale didn't like him, they would slit his mouth wide open. And so that's the imagery that now gets portrayed to superhero movies, particularly with the Joker in Batman, who is the image of the Camazotz, which is a demigod out of the Quiché Maya and a branch of the Xibalba, which is just like a Nephilim of other cultures. And so superheroes, just as heroes in Greek culture, superheroes are just an allegory of the giants and the demigods and the superpowers that they had before. There's different kinds of them, and they have different looks depending on who their godfathers were.
So with the Antichrist, I mean, he has more than just that. We know there's many names too. So with him specifically, is he like he's like probably I mean, it's obviously the one that they're waiting for the whole time. Someone that I listen to, John Burnett, he kind of describes it as the Antichrist is someone where God takes out the restraining, like, perceptive rods, because he's 100% like infused with the demonic energy sort of thing. Is that kind of why they want that ultimate Antichrist, is because he synthesizes with the demonic energy like 100%, which allows him to trick the world pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, you have the word unicorn that was put into the Bible for a wild bull. And you have the single horn that comes up in Daniel 8. He is the unicorn, right? The unicorn horn is the third eye, as it's understood, that receives the knowledge as a direct access to the divine essence and all of the knowledge of the world. And there's more to the allegory of the unicorn, but I'll just so I don't lose people with where I'm going here. The Antichrist is also understood as the Christ consciousness in the New Age movement. It's going to be that incarnation, as they call it, right? And so he's going to have power to emulate and deceive people that he's the true Messiah, right? So we know biblically that in Second Thessalonians he receives all the power that Satan can provide him. In Revelation 12, he receives power from the dragon. So there's something that's going on here. Either Satan is going to be his avatar, or maybe it's Azazel, which is another dragon as an original seraphim, a dragon angel, serpent-faced angel with 6 wings, Isaiah 6. But he receives power from Satan and the dragon. So they could both be part of him. What is also really bizarre is in Revelation 16, out of the false prophet and out of the Antichrist as humans or human-like beings, they are, at the time of Armageddon, you have demons coming out of the mouths of both of them to gather the world to Armageddon. So you could have demons that are in him as well by that sort of understanding. Or you could translate that out of Greek is that he commands with his mouth demons, just as they believe in the occult that Solomon could command the demons. And they draft him as a black magician as well into the secret societies. But they draft all of the patriarchs in and just sort of reimagine them, right? So I think you can make a very good case that Antichrist is going to be part human, could be a son of Satan, could be a descendant of angels, could be a son of an angel created sometime in the end time generation, and that he also has this other power that's coming in. And what's also interesting is he's called the son of perdition, just as Judas was in the King James Version Bible. And perdition is a word that is basically, reflecting this whole idea of going to the lake of fire. But it's rooted in the words of Apollyon, the destroyer. So you could understand that as somehow connected to the destroyer, Apollyon Abaddon, who is probably Azazel. At least from the book of Enoch, he's the leader of the watchers that was sent to the abyss. And Antichrist is equated with the one who comes up out of the abyss in Revelation 17 as the one who once was, now is not, will be again, but will come up out of the abyss. So there's a connection there. And what's interesting is he also, Antichrist, in Daniel chapter 11, he worships a god of forces, which is the Hebrew word Maus. And Maus is rooted in a Hebrew word azed, as. So Maus means forces, as means strong, means forces, and as is rooted in a goat word, and also is the source word for azaz, also meaning strong, as it's used for the strong ones of the terrible ones in Isaiah 25, a branch that's going to die in the end time at the base of a mountain, Mount Hermon, at the time of Armageddon. Another rabbit hole. I'll get back on track. So he's going to worship a god, which is not El or Elohim, El being the singular. It's actually Elah. And it's that female format, which could mean the power of a god, or it could mean a female goddess. So it's hard to know, but it probably, as it's understood with forces, probably Azazel, because he's the destroyer of the antediluvian world. He's the one who will lead the angels out of the abyss in Revelation 9 before the midpoint, before Antichrist takes power. And he's the one who taught all the arts of war to the antediluvian world, the complete craft of war, as it's talked about in the book of Enoch. And Azazel, we actually get that word in the Bible through the word scapegoat, which is the second goat that is sacrificed on the Day of Atonement. That goes back to the Hebrew word Azazel. And so you have this very strong God who is degraded to a satyr goat god afterwards, right? Who was the leader of the antediluvian rebellion and the destroyer god, destroyer of the antediluvian world, the one who was piled on with all the sins of the antediluvian world. And we're not told who this scapegoat, Azazel, is being sacrificed for, what sins. I think he's being sacrificed for the antediluvian sins. And of course, Azazel is depicted as a goat god, as a satyr god, as a Bacchus god, Cern god, Cernunnos god, Pan god, and all the different names for the different satyr gods that are out there. And what's interesting about that word satyr, I know I'm on a long rant here, but we get the word watcher 4 times in the Bible, and it's all in the book of Daniel, chapter 4, and it goes back to the Hebrew word ear, I-W-I-R. And satyr is a contracted form of another word that means hairy and shaggy, and goat, which is sa or sair, but it's contracted, so it'll be spelled S-A with kind of an apostrophe, then I-ear for watcher. So a sair is a hairy, shaggy goat watcher, as opposed to just I-ear, that's a watcher. And of course, I-ear is transliterated as satyr or goat god. And they show up after the flood because they've been degraded, the ones who didn't go to the abyss, just like Satan was degraded to Satan status from Halel and whatever other names and titles that he would have had. So all of that starts to make some sense coming together for understanding how the connections will be related to these ancient gods and to Antichrist and the things that he does in the end time.
So, wow, my brain is just shocked.
If you need a moment there, Greg, I've got a question I've been wanting to ask.
Sure. I'm trying to I was trying to formulate one, but
sure, you work on that one.
Shoot it off.
I've got one for the man here. Okay,
go ahead.
So that's super interesting. And I had one question, but I'm gonna let that one go for now. This one is more pertinent to me. So on the topic of entertainment and how we've seen throughout, I'd say the last 120, no, I guess 100 years, intense themes throughout storytelling, specifically in movies and in shows, really having a profound effect on the populace by and large. Like, people changed their whole lives after they started watching Leave It to Beaver. They really did, in a sense, try and emulate sort of that nuclear family household. Same thing sort of happens when you see people observing films like Apocalypse Now or Platoon. You get this sense of what war and the viciousness and the savagery of it can be, and it sort of shapes people's understanding of what it is going into there, especially when you read books like, there's a fantastic book called Ultimate Deathmatch, written by a gentleman named Ben Thompson, and inside there he describes a lot of what was going on in Vietnam at this time. And you have sort of this frame of reference for it inside your mind from seeing Apocalypse Now or Platoon or Good Morning Vietnam, or even Forrest Gump. You have this idea of it. So given that that's sort of a fact, that you have huge cultural movements and understandings and shapings of thought processes happening from what we are bombarded with on screen, whether it be silver or in our home. So I have a theory that this is the way it's going to be in the end, but I want your take on it. My theory, in the end days, when people are actually presented with the opportunity to take the mark of the beast, my theory is that the mark is not just going to be the ability to use your body or your own bioelectrical field as a means of conveying currency to pay for goods and or services. My theory is that the mark of the beast that one receives in them, and this is just given the fact that we have seen such a huge and tremendous push towards transhumanism and transspeciesism over the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 years recently. I have a theory that the mark of the beast is going to sort of allow the person who receives it to do as the angels do who disrobe from the Orchiturion, to be able to take on either female or male form with all the reproductive organs that go with one or the other, and to be able to do so interchangeably. Um, I've I've heard some claims made about the angels who did disrobe from the Orchiturion being able to, out of necessity, take up either a female sex look to them or a male sex looks to them. So that's my theory going forward, is that the mark will allow people to be able to change like that, which is why it's going to be so alluring to people who are already bent that way to want to go get it, because, oh yeah, I'm a trans person, I've been a man stuck in a woman's body all my life, now I have the opportunity to go ahead and actually not just present myself that way, but actually be able to have the physical capability to carry myself out that way down to my very DNA. And given that entertainment has been such a huge promoter of things throughout the ages,
Yep.
do you think there's going to be a connection with transhumanism, transspeciesism, the mark of the beast in that sense of how it's going to present? And do you think that it's going to have a genetic appear to it beyond just the currency spending aspect, or do you think it will be something different?
Oh, it's a lot more. It's the whole
Okay.
system that you have access to. So what's interesting with what you're talking about, and you covered a lot of territory there. So let me see whether I can piece some of that together. Uh,
I know it
so
was kind of a multifaceted question there.
You said
so
one question, Eric. That
I'm
was
sorry. We're sorry. A
15.
lot of
Okay,
branches.
okay. There's a theme there. So there was a series that was out on, I think I was on Netflix, and I can't remember the name of it, but people could change bodies using sleeves, they called it, right? So you could
Yes, altered
con-
carbon.
yeah, that's the one. And so this notion that you can transfer the spirit or your consciousness, upload it and download it, is a concept that they're putting out there. I don't know whether or not humans would be able to do that or not, or they'll be deceived that maybe you might be able to do that down the road. But we do know demons would be able to do that. And we also know that there's an ability to create not only clone parts, but maybe a whole clone body that you could be able to do it. We do know they'll probably need some sort of clone body or transhumanism type body for the demons to be able to interact in the world. So look for this technology to be more designed after them, but it doesn't mean they won't hold out this promise that you might be able to do that. So if you look at also the series Quantum Leap, it was a series in the 80s, and there's a new show out right now. They're moving through time, and it's that sort of quantum aspect that's really kind of interesting here. But they're kind of being like an avatar or a demon spirit that goes into another body in another time, right? So they're preparing us for this concept in 1,000 sort of different ways to say, hey, this is just going to be great because we're going to be able to give immortality. We're going to be able to cure all diseases. We're going to give you access to all kinds of knowledge. So there are different lanes of technology that are being developed in separate lanes that we see starting to come together into a nexus point. It's still a ways away. So you have AI, and we've seen that merge with quantum computing, like with the CERN project. So they're able to go into other dimensions and search in multiple search numbers as opposed to single shot through just quantum. You need AI to search multiple universes or multiple places in that universe at the same time. We see that merging. We see AI now merging with what might be, what is that digital currency for the mark of the beast with cryptocurrency. So there's you can Google, there's all sorts of these companies that are using AI in combination with using their cryptocurrency. We see the Federal Reserve starting to move into want to take control since last November of cryptocurrency, because I think it's been pioneered long enough to start to be perhaps that model that can work with quantum computing. And we know it probably can, because they say the only thing that can break down the security of cryptocurrency is quantum mechanics and quantum computing. And that's with that emergence of AI with it. So it's going to be able to be workable with that in multiple dimensions. So everything we're talking about can work in this world and in other dimensions. When we talked about the CERN project, not only do I think they want to be able to get into Hades, into Sheol, to get their gods out of the abyss, but they're searching for a particle. They're searching for something called the Atman particle, or the Atma particle. And what's interesting about that is that quantum mechanics was thought with the pioneers. To understand it, you needed to understand the Upanishads and the Vedas to understand quantum mechanics, and therefore quantum computing. It's been sort of part of that whole process to get the sort of concept. And so this particle that they're looking for is an invisible particle. It cannot be measured. I mean, we can't see what's at that level anyways, but you can find a way to measure what they call visible particles, using a layman's term. This invisible particle, the Atma, the Atman, it merges with a measurable particle. It is the source of all knowledge in that belief system, that then sends that information through all universes instantaneously through something called quantum entanglement. This is what they call the divine essence. It is the whole root to all wisdom and knowledge. That access to Godhood, you need immortality and you need unlimited knowledge. It is Sophia, the love of wisdom. It is that mother goddess. It is part of that counterfeiting of the Holy Spirit. That's part of that merging of the mark. And the mark will also be an oath of loyalty in that oath-based ideology and system that they have. And it will be able to deliver all sorts of things that can prevent diseases, both at the level that we have today, but even lower. It will be able to work at the bot level, at the quantum level, at the building blocks level. It can change everything up through your DNA, and it can give you long lasting life. So all of this is part of what the beast system is going to be, because it literally runs the whole world. It's like this great cloud system. This great cloud system in another dimension.
So I know you're familiar with Planck's constant, the idea that you can only divide to a certain level, and then after that, whatever you're dividing loses locality.
Yep.
Do you think that's also possibly why CERN has been smashing atoms and trying to obliterate these particles smaller and smaller and smaller, not just to rip holes in whatever fabric of space-time, but is it possible that they're trying to see at what point do we need to get this particle down to so that it loses locality and is instantly assimilated into everything all at once? Because that to me seems like that's going to be the only way that that'd be possible to do. Essentially, build whoever is in commune and concert with the beast into this collective hive mind establishment in order to have instant knowledge and instant understanding of literally all knowledge in the universe, but be able to enjoy like a faux immortality and this faux superhuman enjoyment.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out how to access that particle and separate it from what the particles that they can be measured, right? It is the core thing that I think that they're trying to have access for, and that it will work in all universes, all dimensions at the same time.
Wow.
So I think that seems to be what they're trying to do.
Wow. Now I have more research, Gary. Thank you.
The question I was thinking of, going back to like Lucifer and like the Elohim, to where we could say that's kind of why they distinguish Yahweh as the Most High, because he's the Elohim number one sort of thing, and then you had all the Elohims that were like either in the council, good and bad sort of thing. Um, the serpent in the garden, the Nakash, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've heard again through Mike to Heiser, that it could be possible that when you look at the wording of that scene, it couldn't be it. It's possible that I guess to you, do you think that was an actual snake, or was it an actual like Elohim that had the snake-like features that Satan
Yeah,
possessed to
sure.
influence Eve to partake
Yeah,
in the fruit?
I mean, the thing is with Kabbalism and with polytheism is that
Hmm.
they believe, that Satan was in Eden, and we know that because in Ezekiel 28, he was in Eden,
Hmm.
and that he, in some versions provided the deception himself or had sex, right? So I tend not to go. I don't totally dismiss it, but I think biblically, whether it's Hebrew or it's in English as we have it, and particularly as you understand the Hebrew, it sort of dismisses that. And so it's I like to say Nakash too. It's actually Nahash as the Hebrews. It's that C is silent.
Hmm.
Um, it's like a Horim that's spelt with a CH. So, but that is an actual being, a serpent, and it's an intelligent being. And the Gnostics believe it was a size, it's as tall as a camel, so it was larger than a human, and it was serpent-like, and that it was walking, talking, and that there may have even been winged ones, like we would understand as the dragon physically, as opposed to a dragon angel.
Hmm.
So the Bible is pretty accurate in its original languages to the words that it's using. If it wants to talk about a seraphim, it's going to use the word seraph, and seraph is the serpent-faced angel, right? Or seraphim. If it wants to talk about a serpent, it's going to use the word nahash, and it's used like that over and over and over and over. Now, whether it's who's doing the deception or whether or not there was sex or not, what we do know is Satan wasn't punished. He did not have his arms hacked off. He did not have his legs hacked off. He did not have his speech taken away. He did not have his intelligence taken away. It was the serpent.
Mm.
So you wouldn't punish somebody else for what you did. Now, you could say that Satan did what he did with Judas, that he used the Nahash as his avatar, as his avatara. I think that is possible as well. But this was a distinct being that was changed in its form to crawl on the ground as it does today.
Hmm.
And that I think that we have to make sure that whichever language we're looking at it at, that we're not creating contradictions within the Bible. And you just can't sort of make that mesh. And the ones that go with the idea that Satan had sex with Eve, even within the same sentence, you start to get contradictions as you look at what that means. It makes no sense. So it has to make sense in the sentence. It has to make sense in the verse that it's in. It has to make sense in the chapter, and it can't contradict anything throughout the Bible. And when you use that sort of test, it's a serpent, a
Okay.
snake.
Very cool. Yeah, I was curious about that for sure. So it's
I
an
have a
actual.
I have a 4-part series I did on this, and again, I don't rule it out.
Mhm.
I even give why some people think, as they use Cain being acquired, which is the Hebrew word kana, which is connected to Cain, um, that he was given because it wasn't born of Adam and Eve. It was born outside of Adam. But again, it doesn't test the time of the strict analysis as you translate each of the words. So I've got a 4-part series on it, walks you through the language as it's written in the KJV and as it's written in Hebrew, and every aspect about it. Every argument that's out there on it, it's covered.
Nice.
It doesn't stack up. But again, I'm not saying it's not possible. I just can't prove it biblically. It doesn't matter to me whether he was or wasn't. I just can't make that biblical support make it stick without contradictions.
Yeah. Well, that sort of brings me back to the people of day 6, where you have inside you have in Genesis 2, if it begins by saying, so the heavens and the earth were created, finished, God rested and all that, and then it goes right into the creation of man and women. Man and woman. So like, while I definitely grant the possibility that you have these 6-day people created, is it also possible though that Genesis 2 is sort of giving us a summary understanding of all that took place between Adam being created and then Eve being created in that same small amount of time? And my only real reason for asking that question is, when we get to Cain and Abel and we have the tragedy that is Cain murdering Abel over this seemingly understanding of a slight that he's being dealt by God. Abel's sacrifice is accepted, Cain's is not. You have Abel giving the first fruits of his flock, Cain giving of the cursed ground. Because it doesn't say anywhere inside there just how much time has elapsed from when Eve gave birth to Cain and Abel to the point where Cain actually murders him. Like, it could have been when they were in their teens, their 20s, 30s. It could have been 80 years from then.
But less than 130, because
yes,
of the Seth
exactly.
marker. Yeah.
So, and that's what brings me to my next question is it possible then that Cain and Abel had both had children up to this point that also had children who had children who had children who had children, and possibly there were more people on earth than most people would initially grant, just at face value there? Because then I could see in a certain sense Cain possibly running into somebody out in the world after he's got that mark placed upon him by God, and he has to flee essentially for his life, and he has the whole dialogue with God. What if somebody finds me and slays me? Like I'm on my own now, and only based off of the idea inside. And this is kind of connecting something else, but based off the idea at the Tower of Babel, where God disperses the nations out into the world, is it also possible that there was sort of as families came into their own, maybe some clung close to Adam and Eve, but others dispersed and went out and started to really populate very quickly?
I suppose you could say everything is possible once you say, do you think this is possible? But we don't get a scripture for that.
Yeah, and that's why I wonder, because like we don't have the definite amount of years between their birth and then the murder and then Cain going.
No, I mean, what we get only is the complete Seth line and the complete Cain line, and then we get the flood, but we're not told about all of these other peoples. And obviously there was civilizations, right? But the thing is I'm very careful not to add to scripture. I try to be. And so for me to say, yeah, I can speculate that there might have been, except that I still have a gap in here.
Yes, of course.
In terms of when were the sons and daughters born to Adam and Eve, because it's sometime after Seth is born. So before Seth is born at 130, which happens after Cain leaves by the linear chronology that we're getting, we're not seeing any genealogies, period. The only thing that's going on is Cain meets his wife somehow, somewhere beforehand, and creates a genealogy.
Like you
So
said, we
those,
have that gap. It's like,
Mhm.
was there other
but
procreation?
it's before Seth is born.
Yeah, but like, okay, so like with Seth, you know
And
how
then
Eve
only
says,
after Seth are their daughters and sons, other daughters and sons born.
well, and so check this out. So like Eve, she says, I've been blessed. God has given me another man, essentially to take the place of Abel. And this is like reason I bring this up is because we have Abraham, who his first son is Ishmael through the wife that his wife Sarai gives to him, which is one of his slaves. However, when he has Isaac, Isaac is recognized in the Bible by Abraham and God as his only begotten son. So is it also possible in the sense I feel like it's possible in the sense that you have Abel, Cain, and then Seth as being of a begotten lineage to Eve. I'm not saying that Eve had any other male children in between there, in
Well,
between Cain, Abel, and Seth, but that it's possible that of those three that she had, those are the ones that were of that begotten line, that sort of endowment lineage, ones that would carry on the blessing of the father through to their next of
sure,
kin.
sure. I think through Adam and Eve, then through Seth and his wife. That's that begotten line, as opposed to the other seed line that is uh, presented through Cain. And then after the flood, you have Abraham and Sarah, as it descends down through Shem from Noah and his wife.
Hmm.
There's a set pair, as opposed to Ishmael. Ishmael's going to receive their own blessings and covenant and a
Hmm.
visit from the angel of the Lord and their own peoples, but not through the divine begotten lineage, right? It's that lineage that is being identified there. So I'm not sure what you were saying, other than I understood that part. I'm just not sure what connection
No,
you're trying to make with that.
yeah. So the point I'm making with that is when it makes a distinction that Eve, she says, like bless God, essentially bless God, I've received another man, essentially to
Yep.
take the place of Abel.
Yep.
My positing with that is that even though we see after that where it talks about sons and daughters being born after that, um, I feel like there's a possibility that between Cain, Abel, and between Cain and Abel before Seth was born, that there could have been a possibility that we had more sons and daughters born, just possibly not through Eve and Adam,
Yep.
or possibly through Eve and Adam, but maybe not of a begotten lineage.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, it's not. We don't have scripture on that. Well, I will
Yeah, I know, I
say.
know.
What I will say is in Genesis 4, where you get the lineage of Cain's descendants, you
Hmm.
get Seth's lineage introduced there as well. So at some point in time within that lineage of Cain, that's where it's going to be inserted. We just don't know where, but it's
Sure.
listed afterwards, which again, if you understand the Bible unfolds in a linear basis, it's sometime later. And then you get the full um, accounting of that lineage in Genesis 5.
It makes me wonder just how much time elapsed between there, because we know Adam lived to be into the 900s.
Yeah,
It's like just exact. I wish we had more of a snapshot of everything that took place
I agree.
in
I
that millennium.
I
It'd be
agree.
so cool to see that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the 2 hour mark. Roughly have 13 minutes left here. So I think what we'll go ahead and do is I saw some comments of people that possibly have questions, so that maybe Gary can answer uh, towards the end, and then we'll wrap up the show. Brian Tucker asked way in the beginning when the show started. I have a question regarding Genesis 49 9 for Gary.
Mhm.
Who is Shiloh?
Who is Shiloh? Can you give me the verse on that?
Yeah, I can pull it up.
Yep.
Let's see, Genesis
Got you right here.
49 9.
This
It
is
says, Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? Are you sure that's Genesis 49:9? Brian?
I could Google Shiloh, but I'm not sure I got time to do that.
Yeah, I'm scouring ESV right now. I'm on eSword right now, and I get nothing popping up for that.
Okay.
Let me check Smith's.
It wasn't
Lion
just
of
what
Judah. Brian says Lion of Judah. Are you insinuating that this person named Shiloh is considered the Lion of Judah? Why don't we
what verse is that in again?
he
49:25.
originally said Genesis 49:9, and then he just said Lion of Judah, and then I just read, do you have it back up, Eric? 49?
Yeah, 49. Judah is a lion's cub from the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion and a lioness. Who dares rouse him?
Oh, come on.
And then just looking at Shiloh from Smith's dictionary, it talks about Shiloh, the waters of a certain soft flowing stream. Reference is Isaiah 8:6, better known under the latter name of Siloam, the only perennial spring of Jerusalem.
Is that what you meant, Brian? 'Cause right now we're not really finding.
Yeah, does. And you think that was in 49 what?
9.
49 verse 9.
9. Okay, I thought I heard 29. Sorry. See whether I can bring up on that word. 49:9.
Sure.
So that's Judah is a lion's whelp, and that's what he want is lion. Or as a lion who shall come up from him, the scepter shall not depart from Judah till Shiloh. There we go. 49:10.
Okay.
So
Oh,
that's
okay.
an epitaph for the Messiah is what it means, which is the Lion of Judah, right? So
Oh, okay. Well, my ESV did not state that.
Probably in the NASB.
Okay. So I guess based on that, he was asking just who
yeah,
was
it's an
Shiloh.
epitaph it's defined as an epitaph for the Messiah, so the Lion of Judah.
All right. There you go. Brian making us look. What's going
Hey,
on
we'll
over
take
here?
it.
It just eluded me what Shiloh had meant in Hebrew. So
Oh, gotcha.
Well, it's interesting too. In Hitchcock's dictionary, Shiloh is described as a bow, weapon, or armor. And I mean, like Jesus is described as the Word, literally
Yep.
the Word of God, and the Word is
And a
described as
sword
a
comes out
two-edged
from-
sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got one protruding from his mouth. Seeing a little similarity there.
Let's see. Yeah, guys, if you have any questions that Gary can that you want Gary to answer, feel free to leave it in the comment. I know over on Rumble, Eddie Morvant, we were talking about just what we were talking about, the difference between that gap between Eve having all that. And he says, is it possible that Adam procreated with his daughters? So going with the whole incense sort of thing, because I remember hearing a little bit about that.
Well, we don't get biblically that he procreated with any of his daughters. Again, the only thing that we're told in Bible is after Seth, when Adam was 130 years old, then sons and daughters were born. That's all we get. And the only other reference to his sons and daughters are in other than the named ones, comes in Deuteronomy 32 with the 70 sons of Adam.
Okay. All right, Brian. I got Brian Tucker again with another question. Is Michael a seraphim, six-wing angel?
No, he's an archangel. So there are 4 groups of watchers, as they're called in the book of Enoch. And as we get watcher, as we mentioned, it is a biblical word in the book of Daniel. And those 4 groups that are mentioned in the Bible are the archangels, are the seraphim, are the cherubim, and then these interesting ones where we don't get their name provided biblically unless you go back to Hebrew, which are the cherubim that are in the wheels, the beings within the wheels in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, which is the outside wheel as the wheel part, not the being, is Gigal, as in Raphaim Gigal, wheel of the giants. In this case, just the wheel. but this interesting being that's within the wheels has a face of a cherub. So it's distinct from the cherub. We don't know what face that is. Is it 4 faces of the cherub that's in there? But we also get 3 other faces of this being that's in there. It's called the Ophan. When you put the I am male plural on, you get Ophanim, which the book of Enoch references as the other group of angels that are watchers that are always awake around the throne, which watcher, Ayer, goes back to the word to watch, to be wakeful, not to sleep, and back into another word that's of similar pronunciation, but is spelt with a U at the beginning.
Very good. Very good. I guess
Soundly handled.
soundly handled. Like I said,
And Archangel Michael and Gabriel, as you take that back into Hebrew, are defined as archangels as well. So typically we sort of look at 7 archangels that are around the throne. There could be 4 of those 7 which are higher, or 4 ones that are distinct, that are the 4 winds of prophecy.
And that's Michael, Gabriel, because there's at
Well,
least, you said at least 4. Isn't there at least 4 that are always facing God until God sends them out to do stuff?
well, you have angels on all 4 sides, different groups of the angels and at their heads, but with the 4, with the we're not told how many archangels there actually are. I'm presuming it's the 7 that stand before God. That's where I get that from, right? And there are 4 winds of prophecy that come from before the throne. They're talked about in raising the empires. They're talked about in the book of Zechariah 5, the chariots that come out. They're thought to be the 4 angels that come out as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as that's understood to be ruach, and numin as spirit in the Greek, and ruach spirit in Hebrew. But you have only 2 archangels named in the standard version of the Bible. In the old King James Version Apocrypha, you have 2 more that are named. You have Raphael and Uriel, which are also named in the book of Enoch, but we're not given the rest of the names. So we're kind of speculating there, but just sort of the understanding of who's around the throne and the different groups, that would appear to me who they are and how many there are.
Okay.
And they're also the heads of their orders too. So
okay, maybe that's what I was kind of thinking of, the head of the order sort of thing. Looking over at the comments, well, not really seeing any new ones popping up right now, but I guess we'll go ahead and we'll do the opposite, since you named the hierarchy of angels. Can you kind of give a little bit of a hierarchy of the fallen angels? Or
it's a counterfeit. It's the same thing. They're counterfeiting everything that God does.
okay,
So typically you've got 3 groups of 3 in the angelic hierarchy. I don't quite agree with that. I think there's 4 at the top. There may be 4 streams down below them, or they could fold into 3 streams, 2 all under the seraphim. I'm kind of sort of mixed on it, with angels, the group of angels probably belonging at the bottom level of each, acting as messengers or soldiers or whatever. So you've got angelic orders that fall into the next realm, and the third realm. They've got different names in Greek, and it's really difficult to get the proper understanding in English because the translators confuse the names. So you've got like dunamis, you've got exousia, names like that, arche, which arche would be principalities. You've got powers, which are exousia. You've got dunamis, which are the mighty ones. Then you have a very powerful angel that actually has a different name. That's, I think, is Kyros, which I think are same as the mighty ones. So you've what happens is if you imagine that in each of those columns, they report up the column to the throne of God, and then there would be 4 specific angels that would probably be at the apex of each of those orders.
Okay, I guess I was more thinking of like the demons, or at least
okay. Sure,
fallen.
that's part of the hierarchy, but below the
Mhm.
Saba, the host of heaven. So you have the demons that would fall just below that, and then you get into the elementals.
Mm.
And the elementals include the four that I mentioned earlier, the three small ones, and then the salamanders, which are physical beings. So the Nephilim would be in a physical body larger than the salamanders. Um, and above the elementals. Even in the occult hierarchy, I don't see any other positions that are in there. There's just different beings within those positions.
Okay, yeah, I got like I said, I was kind of thinking of what is it in Revelations where they mention what is it, the Lord
The
of the
locust.
Flies? What's up?
You mentioned the locust with the ability
Well, the
to sting
locust, and then they
somebody.
specifically name certain ones. Like one of them, I think, what is it, the Lord of the Flies? Is that one of them, or Mammoth or something? Ah, never mind. Don't listen to me. I'll find the.
I do have one question though, one final question just regarding Revelation, and it's specifically about Apollyon or
Yeah.
Abaddon.
Mhm.
Um, he is described as an angel. Do you
Mhm.
think he's a fallen angel, or he's one that is still beholden to God, given that he's standing guard over the abyss?
Well, he's the destroyer, as Abaddon and Apollyon is defined as. I would say he's an angel, yeah, fallen angel, probably Azazel. Um, those beings that come out are some sort of angelic being.
See,
Uh,
because I wonder about that deal because we read inside Exodus too, where the night of Passover, when they were putting the blood on the
Mhm.
lintel, it says God rode out with a destroying angel,
yeah.
but it never said whether the angel was for God or against God. So like I wonder on that.
Well, again, everything is counterfeited in the rebellious side. They counterfeit everything. So, yeah, there would be an angel that would be carrying out some of the judgments of God, right? As a destroyer angel. You have a destroyer angel that's going to destroy Babylon in Jeremiah 51.
Mhm.
And you've got two different Hebrew words. One of them is abad, which is the root word for Abaddon,
Hmm.
and there's this wind, this ruach, that's part of the destruction. Antichrist destroys Babylon in Revelation 17 after the destroyer has come up out of the abyss, and they're connected as we talked about. So I would make probably a little bit more of a link in that direction.
Sure, on
Those
the fallen
scorpion
side.
beings, yeah, those scorpion beings. And in my new book, I'll give actually sort of a side by side highlight of the comparisons as to what these things might be.
Cool.
So in ancient Sumeria, and there's different names for these types of beings around the world, you have these scorpion gods, and they're called the Akrabamalu in Sumerian, or the Girdabalu. And a crab is the Hebrew word for scorpion. So there's
Mhm.
some sort of cross pollination in the meaning of the language there. But they have the exact same description as what comes up out of the abyss. And they are either a specially created destroyer type of god, or these are degraded cherubim, as opposed to a degraded seraphim of the which are the satyrs that we talked about earlier. And what's interesting about the cherubim is that they are not only supply in occultism this additional knowledge, but they are like warriors as well. And that if we take that back biblically, do we get anything about cherubim as being warriors? Well, there's two of them placed outside of Eden after Adam and Eve are ostracized, and they have flaming swords.
Hmm.
And so they're protecting Eden from anybody going in. So they're either that or they're just other sort of degraded angels, but I think they might be the actual cherubim as part of those leading watchers.
I found what I was looking for. Wormwood.
Oh, wormwood. Well, wormwood is it's a bitterness. It's a poison, right?
Hmm.
And it poisons the rivers as it shows up. So I think that's either probably a nuclear weapon or biological
Oh,
weapons that destroy some of the rivers. Wormwood shows up in the Old Testament as well as a poison and thought to be a hemlock type of poison in other
Hmm.
sort of applications. Some
Wow.
people think it's a planet. Some people think it's an angel, but the application seems to be part of the judgments and, part of the 25% destruction of the world in Revelation 6.
That's where I was getting confused. I was like, I know it's like a bug or something. I couldn't think of it. So I'm bad at that sort of stuff.
It's also used if you're drinking absinthe too. A little bit of wormwood with that.
Yeah.
Well, we are past the 2-hour mark, so I don't want to hold Gary anymore if he has other things he needs to do. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And Gary, feel free to plug in whatever you want.
Sure.
As we,
So I mentioned a
on
few
another show.
documents throughout the show. So if you're interested in those documents, name them by document. You can get a hold of me through my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. So to get a hold of me on the website, you go to the media page, and where it says contact Gary Wayne for an interview, click on that. That's my email. And ask for the document or ask me a question. It might take me 6 weeks or so to get back to you, but I will get back to you. I'm just running way behind on all the things that I'm doing right now. And on that website, you can also get a copy of my book if you're interested. You can get a signed copy. You can go to the Buy Now page. And also on the front or on the Buy Now page, if you wanted to click over to get the Kindle version, you can do that from the website. You can also link over to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, or amazon.ca. So the fastest way is to go through the website, either buy from me or from those major retailers. There's also a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters, so you get a good feel for the book, whether it's the book for you or not. And believe me, it's only a tip of the iceberg as to how much information is in the book. It'll take months for you to read. I have a new book that will be coming out this year. It's working with the details through the publisher right now to get it into the queue and do the artwork and the editing and stuff like that. It's specifically targeted at Christians. It's called the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. And the subline is how understanding prehistory and giants helps define end time prophecy. And it's, as I say, it's specifically targeted at Christians for what people were asking me they wanted more information on. It is shorter than the first book. It's not 98 chapters, but it is not a short book, and it is loaded with information as well. It is 85 chapters and about 600 pages. So
Yes. Very good. Very good. Yes, all of Gary's information should be in the description over on YouTube and as well as Rumble. Eric, anything you want to shout out real quick?
Yeah, actually. So I am in the process myself of finishing some editing on a previous topic that I covered, which is all about the Holy Spirit and spiritual gifts. Once I'm finished with that, it's going to be going up on my locals page, and I'll be back to producing content in earnest multiple times a week. So if anybody would like to support the work that I do, you can reach out to me on my locals page at angellegend.locals.com. It's ANGELEGEND, all one word. And if you feel so led, you can support my work there. Anybody who supports my work will get access to all of my collegiate level research in forms of PDFs right there for download. Feel free to share them with your friends and family. Feel free to share them with that person in your life that is seeking answers and they don't know where to look. It's meant to be more than just knowledge for you to expand your understanding of the Bible and the themes therein. It's meant to be a tool to add to your arsenal to help you further the work of Jesus Christ in this world and hopefully help you reach your community in love. So probably in the next 1 to 2 weeks, I will be back in full swing on my own content production, and all of those will be available for people.
Awesome. Very cool. And your stuff is in the description as well on YouTube and Rumble. Everyone is saying thank you, Gary. Everyone's saying great show. So thank all of you guys for coming by. Obviously, I'm pretty sure Gary's going to be scheduled some more that I know I want to just keep this going. But once again, thank you, Gary, for taking the time to talk and to share your work.
Yes.
I feel like we're losing a lot of people doing the Lord's work. They're visiting him and stuff. So don't die anytime soon. That's all I'm going to ask you to do, because you are literally doing the Lord's work. So,
been a blast hanging out, Gary. Don't die.
Yeah, please.
I'll do my
please don't leave
best.
us. No. But yeah, like and subscribe the videos on both YouTube and Rumble. Check Gary out. Go support his book. It's amazing. Like you said, another book is coming out hopefully soon. But just all that stuff. Again, thank you, Gary, and thanks to everyone who
Thank you.
stopped by. And have a good night, you guys. Take care. Thanks for hanging out with us. Later.